Inner peace out. Let your inner peace out. Inner peace out. Let your inner peace out. Karmic relief. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your screen, Mr. Ed Trout.
Thank you, Michael. And also welcome to your screen, the Reverend Michael Everett Davis.
Hey, that's the first time I did our little theme song live.
It is. Cut out just a little bit, but that's okay.
Oh, we didn't test it.
Right. So welcome for everyone watching. Some signed in on the Zoom webinar, some of you watching through Facebook. We will try to watch both channels, but it is faster for us to get response to the Zoom webinar. So this is Karmic Relief from Inner Peace Out, and we like to talk to a variety of guests and look at ways that principles that we view as basic improvisational life skills kind of show up everywhere. Things like being present with people and accepting other people, collaborating with other people in life, finding the joy in life and making commitments to the things that matter to us. So that's sort of where we come from. And in some cases, we would call this applied improvisation. So we are taking applied improv skills that might otherwise be performance skills, but we use them in day-to-day life.
That sounds fancy and scary.
Right, it is. So fancy and so not scary. Tonight we are thrilled. We are going to be bringing out shortly our very special guest, the Reverend Dr. Sushmita Mukherjee. She is a phenomenal human being. Michael, what can you tell us about Sushmita?
Oh my goodness. Well, Reverend Sushmita is an ordained take two. Reverend Sushmita is an ordained interspiritual minister, just like me, and a trained interspiritual counselor with a part-time practice providing spiritual counseling to individuals and groups. Her work has a strong Jungian archetypal orientation. She trained as a biophysicist in India and in the US, working as an associate professor of research at the Medical College of Cornell University. Her scientific work focuses on high-resolution microscopy and image analysis, and thus she is very finely attuned to the nuances of images and the stories images can tell. She sees images as living psychic entities, which have the power to influence our thinking and, consciously aligned, have the power to transform our souls and our lived lives.
Her spiritual orientation is toward wholeness and integration rather than transcendence and perfection. So in practice, this involves remaining attentive to and holding the tension to the best of her ability between the polarities of spirit and soul, body and mind, masculine and feminine, all of those other dualities of life. She sees her, she sees this task as personally cultivating and companioning others as they cultivate the strength and tenacity to dance with life's polarities by cultivating spiritual depth and maturity, and advocating for diversity in all realms where we tend to treat any people as other. I said that so smoothly, so beautifully. She's a much better speaker than we are.
We're professionals.
She summarizes her work by saying, and I love this, she strives to remain oriented to the center point of the cross, honoring both the vertical dimensions of depth and aspiration and the horizontal dimensions of engagement in personal and communal life. So I think it is time for us to stop blathering on and bring out the Reverend Dr. Sushmita Mukherjee. Hello,
Sushmita. Happy to see
welcome.
you.
It is very good to have you here, and for full disclosure, you and Michael not only attended the same seminary, but actually went through seminary in the same class, right?
We are classmates, exactly.
We are classmates.
Nice. So, so you have spent a lot more time together than you, Sushmita, and I have spent together. Whereas Michael and I have spent a lot of time together, and that's okay. We we want to look at your background because for a lot of people, science on one hand and spirituality on the other are often at odds, right? One seems to be based on fact and verifying, and one is more based on feeling and intuition and faith. Um, so I'm curious for you, coming at your life from both of those vantage points, um, did you ever have problems sort of balancing those? Has it, or was it just something that always sat within you in both sides?
Nope. No. It has been a struggle, and it's only now, the last few years, that I can hold the two together. It's interesting because when I was young, when I was an adolescent, I came across the book, the Tao of Physics, and that kind of took me on a tailspin, and I was like, everything this guy's saying makes sense. But then I started to get closer to organized religion, and I started to see the discrepancies between what was being said and what was being practiced by the practitioners. And there came a time when I said, I don't want to have anything to do with religion, anything to do with spirituality. It's all bosh. And I'm a scientist, and that's what I do. And then I came to this country, which was at the end of 95. And that's when I think when I actually moved away from India, or that's where I grew up, I started to feel that there was something very fundamental in me that was not finding a voice. And eventually I came to spirituality actually through the back door, if you will. So through mythology, world mythology as taught by Joseph Campbell.
Oh, yeah.
So that was my way back in through the back door.
Oh, that's awesome. That just that opening question now makes me wish we had like 3 hours to talk because I want to talk so much more. Michael,
the two of you are going to be best friends, by the time.
Right.
Which I knew you would be. So I had a chance to experience a small portion of your dream work in a workshop. But for those who have not experienced it, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I mean, dreams for me are yeah, they're just so powerful because often I feel like that's sort of the most unfiltered experience that we have, because when we are awake, when we're doing like now, I mean, the ego is constantly monitoring what I say, how I look, whether my microphone is in the right place or not, all these different things. But when we're sleeping, the ego kind of takes a back seat. I mean, there's still a dream ego, but it's much less tenacious. So all these other parts of ourselves, all the, I would say the deeper, richer things can come to the surface and tell their stories. So to me, dream work is really about understanding the language of the soul, because that's how soul speaks, through those dream images.
Nice. Well, and speaking of dream images, you had talked about imagery and how you believe imagery in general, it's its own living psychic thing that can have a profound effect on us. And as a visual artist myself, I firmly believe that as well. But I'm wondering, looking to those profound effects, hopefully positive, but perhaps positive and negative, what have you seen from imagery and working with that imagery that has actually been some fundamental change or something that's been able to come forth because of that imagery?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I think about my life and everything that I do, it kind of circumambulates images. And sometimes it's concrete images, like images, like one of the things, I'll tell you a story, maybe that's really going to illustrate this. When I had just started working in a different kind of microscopic modality, we talk. So I was in a urology suite, and we were. My colleague, who's a urologist, was doing a cystoscopy. So he was looking at the bladder of a patient for cancers, and you could see. So on the monitor, you saw the cannula going in, and then you saw kind of the fleshy parts and the water being squirted and all that. And then suddenly his scope became steady, and it was focused on this tumor. And this tumor, they call it exophytic tumor. Exo is coming out, and phytic is like a plant. And I'm not kidding you. This tumor looked like an undersea animal that was kind of had its little frilly tentacles kind of floating in the water. And I was mesmerized. I was really mesmerized. And the question that kind of drove me in that field for many years was, what is the story this creature is trying to say? And how have I been fundamentally transformed when I have seen the beauty of cancer under the scope? So that's maybe one kind of illustration.
Yeah, thank you. That's a beautiful illustration. And I did neglect to point out at the very top, by the way, I talked about communicating with people who are watching. But those of you who are in the Zoom webinar, if you have comments, if you have questions that you want to specifically ask, feel free to type those into the chat. That, depending upon your screen, usually is available at the bottom of your screen, but we do watch the chat. And if you are on Facebook watching, we do watch that as well. I say we, meaning Michael, watches that Facebook chat as well. So if you have your own questions, feel free to enter those too. But yes, that was a beautiful illustration. And you described it so nicely. Thank you.
Yeah, I wish I had thought of it actually during the call before you started talking about that. I remember one time you had brought in to class, it was a cross
mouse colon.
A mouse colon, and oh my gosh, it was gorgeous.
We put it actually on the altar during our intensive as a face of God.
Mm-hmm.
It was the mouse colon, and it is amazingly beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay. Oh gosh, that was.
Yeah, we probably need to move on.
Yeah, we're gonna move on. So, Sushmita, you work as a soul companion or a spiritual counselor. Well, I'm sure it varies with each individual. What does that look like, and for those that want to know? Yeah.
So, yeah, as you say, I mean, it very much depends on the individual. But and there are all these words, because it's a field that's kind of, I think, trying to reinvent itself in some ways, because originally our international organization is called Spiritual Directors International, because the original word was spiritual director. And that really comes from the Franciscan model of spiritual direction, which is actually a very structured process, where you meet once a month, you basically work through a curriculum, and you prepare and so forth. And then it became spiritual counseling, but it's not quite counseling. So what is it? And we keep always talking about, like, what is it that we do? So some people like to say it's companioning, and that's probably a pretty good word, because unlike therapy, we are not trying to fix anything, but we are companioning the person as they encounter the divinity of their understanding. And sometimes it is somebody who's been an atheist all their lives, and they want to connect. There are others who might have been hurt by their religion of birth, and they want to come back home. Other times, people may be facing a crisis in their lives in that moment, and they want to understand not just psychologically what's happening, but what's wanting to be born. What of the soul is wanting to be born. And so that's kind of my job, is really to kind of stay really present to what's arising and companion that.
Nice. And you You use a lot of Jungian archetypes in your practice. Why were you drawn to the Jungian archetypes?
I think it's kind of related a little bit to the first question you asked, that I'm basically a scientist. And so I kind of have almost like a gut level reaction to dogma as something that doesn't work for me. So with the archetypes and with this idea that there is this collective unconscious, and that we all share a set of, actually, so there is archetype, and then there is the archetypal image, and they're not quite the same thing. Archetype is something that cannot actually be totally described. It's, in that sense, it is like divinity, because these are our basic impulses. And then there are images that are associated with that, like the great mother, the wise man, the fool, the whatever. And these are nice ways of kind of orienting ourselves. And for myself, when I'm in the role of the spiritual companion, orienting myself as to what story is being told in this person's life, because these stories are universal stories, and that's where Joseph Campbell comes in. And so yeah, like, is this person on a hero's journey? Is this person is reconciling with the great mother? Is there a lost mermaid story? I mean, so one can kind of take those and use those as kind of a fabric, a backbone on which to kind of hang the pieces of the story.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So, Sushmita, you are a diversity advocate. How or how did you step in? How did you step into being an advocacy this role?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it really took off earlier this year with last year with George Floyd and everything that happened. I mean, I had always felt like, even in so-called inclusive spaces, that there was always a sort of what was front and center was Judeo-Christian, white perspective, and everything else was kind of, yeah, you're welcome, but you're welcome at our table. It's not that we are creating this feast together. So I've felt that for many years, but it's really come to the fore right now. So I'm very, so as I do this work more and more, we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then there's a fourth word that's becoming more part of this conversation, that is belonging. Like, do I really belong here? Because even until the DEI part, diversity, equity, inclusion, it's still somebody else's table and you're included. But when you belong, you belong. It's our table. So that's kind of where, and race is just one piece. I mean, it's diversity. I actually, honestly, the older I get, the more I believe that we humans actually are on a spectrum for almost everything. That these binaries are an artificial creation, whether it's male, female, black, white, neurotypical, neurodivergent. I mean,
Right.
it can go on and on.
Yeah, and that whole concept of belonging, it's so important. A few months back, we had a conversation with Rashida Bonds, who is somebody that works with LGBTQ youth. And there was that whole discussion in a very similar vein between tolerance and acceptance. And like, nobody wants to be tolerated.
Exactly.
You want to be accepted. You want to feel like you are part. And I know that sense of belonging plays into a bit for you right now with what is going on too. But being in this country, while in India, COVID is ravaging the country, and yet here it's not in our backyard. So it's sort of, well, that's bad, but there's not that sense of we all belong to this world. It's a world thing. So I just wanted to give you some space to talk about that if you want to.
Sure. Sure. I mean, the word that I've been using in describing this experience is that I've been feeling surreal. Like it's not quite real, because just like what you said, like around me, things are getting better. Our mayor is saying, oh, we can open up the bars, and which I'm really afraid of, and 100% occupancy of spaces, and people can in small groups take off their mask if they're fully vaccinated. So that's one people are planning their vacations. So that's one narrative. And on a parallel narrative, I'm getting these WhatsApp messages from my family, from my friends. And it is heartbreaking, because people are dying not because their COVID is super bad, but because there is no oxygen. Hospitals have stopped taking in people because there is no oxygen. I mean, it's really heartbreaking to see that diversity and or that discrepancy, if you will. And the one thing that I find, and this might actually challenge some people, but I'll say it because I think it's important, is sometimes this stance of like, oh, we're all one human race and we are global, and look, it's happening not only in India, but it's also happening in Zimbabwe, and it's happening in Bolivia, and so forth. It's I think it's an amazing perspective. We need that, but we sometimes use that to move away from the specificity of that one hospital, which says the person is going to die at our doors because there is no oxygen. So I'm really, as a storyteller, as a person who lives with images and stories, like, how do we hold the specificity and the global experience of this together? I don't have an answer, but I have that as a contemplation.
That brings to mind for me the concept. For many years, people seem to have the goal of not seeing race, right? Like, I don't see race.
Exactly.
Everybody's the same to me, which again is sort of this lovely concept. Yet, when you say that, you're denying the struggles and the challenges that anybody that is different than you may be going through.
Exactly.
And so again, it to me, that feels a very similar thing. Like we're all one world and we're looking at this, but let's also look at the specifics. Can't we acknowledge both?
Yes.
Mhm.
See, we're back to duality, right?
Right.
We're back to duality. Acknowledge both.
We are in one world, but there's a section of our world that is really that's hurting and in need, or there's that's we're responsible for each other.
Yeah, or when we say things like, I mean, I work at a medical school, so we have these health disparities conversations a lot. Like when we say, oh, those people have health problems because they don't eat well.
Mhm.
Have you ever gone and seen what's sold in their local bodegas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's
Oh, yeah.
very easy to do those people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that's another like half-hour long conversation in and of itself. But yes, it is. So far, our people on Zoom webinar have been pretty quiet and just watching. I don't know if we've had any comments or questions from Facebook, but I would love to get something for us to move forward. We always like to throw in just a moment of some improvisational work to sort of see how that also looks in real life. And since we've talked about imagery and dream work and storytelling, I would like to sort of throw out there for anybody watching, listening in any format. Maybe what is an image that you remember from a dream? Could be a childhood dream, could be a recent dream, something that you don't mind sharing that you remember seeing in your dreams and experiencing there. So that we can maybe use that as some fodder for telling a little story together. And we'll do that collaboratively between the three of us, each just taking turns with some storytelling. So nobody through chat yet. Michael, anything on Facebook?
No.
I know they're behind us. if everybody's just being reluctant, we can just pick something as well. So let me ask Sushmita, what is something, when you were a child, like what was one of the favorite gifts you were given or favorite activities you did?
There was a temple near my house. It was a beautiful temple, but I always liked to not enter it from the front, but climb the hills on the back and enter it from the back.
All right, nice. So that whether it's fully entering the temple or just climbing the hills behind the temple, that is the topic then of our story. So Michael, you want to kick us off, and I'll jump in at some point.
All righty. Rita was a curious little girl. She loved to explore the crevices and the corners of her hometown. She also liked to explore the nature that surrounded the town, the woods and the creeks and the hills and the rocks.
One day, Rita got even more adventurous and went a little bit farther away from the land that she knew, and she got into bigger hills that she really had to climb. But she could see just on the other side of those hills was this beautiful building, and she knew she had to get to that building on the other side of the hills. So Rita climbed.
So Rita climbed. And she was going to this beautiful building, but the building was farther than she thought. And she kept going and she kept going, and she got hungry. She wanted to get something to eat. And there were all these berries growing on the rocks. But she didn't know what was safe to eat, what was not safe to eat, and her belly was grumbling.
So they all the berries, she decided they're growing here in abundance. They must be good. So she started picking the berries and placing them in the skirt of her dress as a basket, and she's filling it up, and suddenly she realizes that her fingers are completely purple from the juice of the berries.
And as she's looking at her fingers, wondering what to do, and she's holding the skirt full of berries with the other hand, two birds swooped down and started eating at the berries out of her skirt.
And that's when she knew what was safe to eat, because the birds are smart. They know which berries to eat. So she followed the birds, and whatever berries the birds ate, she would pick those up and eat those and leave the rest behind. So the birds were her taste testers.
So not only did the birds lead her to various berries, they led her to a town on the other side of the mountain, where
she saw that beautiful building and realized it was a temple. And now she knew she had to enter that temple. So with her purple stained hands and her stained dress, she ran all the way to what?
She ran all the way to the temple, but she realized that the priests won't like this dirty girl with all the sticky fingers, because they keep their icons so clean and they wash the floors and everything else, and they wouldn't be very happy to have her there.
So she snuck around to the back of the temple, and there was rocks that were stacked up, and she could climb up on top of those rocks and go in a back door that was raised up.
So she went in that back door. Nobody saw her, and she was so happy to see the inside of the temple finally, with all of its shiny, beautiful icons and everybody being quiet and worshipful. And she felt quiet herself. And it was in that moment that she realized something very important.
What she realized was that the icon there says goddess, and she was made of bronze, and there was light falling on her. And she saw that the goddess was actually winking at her. There was that twinkle in her eyes, which may have been the light, we don't know. But as if the goddess was saying, it's okay, I see you, and you're totally welcome here with your berry-stained hands.
I think we stop right there. Oh, I love that story. That made me very happy. We have come pretty much, well, we're at the end of our half hour, and we want to honor everybody's time. We do have one more little thing. We'll do a Zen poem before we go. But I know with the people on Zoom, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, are people who might want to stick around and ask some other questions and answers once we stop broadcasting. So if you do want to stick around, you can, and we'll give just a few more minutes with the three of us staying on for some individual question and answer face-to-face. If you don't want to, you don't have to. For those of you on Facebook, that isn't an option, unfortunately, at this moment, but you can then tune in for the next program next month and make sure you sign up for the Zoom webinar, and then you can actually stay after for question and answer. We also want to make sure there's nothing left that you really wanted to talk about or needed to say before we wrap this up. So is there anything that we didn't bring up that is important for you to discuss?
Maybe the only thing that I'll just mention is that one of the modalities that I use a lot in my spiritual counseling work and in teaching is a practice called soul collage. And it's a great practice because we jokingly say it's art for the non-artists, because all you do is tear out pictures and stick them together and make a collage. But when you communicate with those collages, you can really get it's like working with a dream. You can get very deep communication from parts of you that you didn't even know existed. So if people are interested, they can look up the word soul collage. There's a lot of beautiful work that one can do with that modality.
That's lovely. And Michael will put up a closing slide, and we'll play a closing song here too after our 3-word poem. But if you want to know more, if you want to reach out to the Reverend Dr. Sushmita Mukherjee, then you can go to her website, which is onseeing.com. That's on-seeing.com. But that should also be on that. There we go. So pick a word from this last half hour. And when you have your word, raise your hand, and we're going to do a 3-word poem. Kick us off, Michael.
Belonging.
Temple.
Berries. I love that. All
Perfect.
right. And there's contact information on that closing slide as well for anybody watching. But as I said, for those of you in the webinar, if you want to hang out, by all means do. And other than that, we will see you next time. And thank you so much for joining us, Sushmita.
Bye-bye.